Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Key Gripe, the show for short, sweet reviews of new release movies, plus the one thing that annoyed me the most. And today I'm going to be talking about the newest film, Nocturnal Animals, and there will be some major spoilers. Susan is an artist who has lost all passion for her work, if she ever had it at all. But when she reads a novel written by a long-lost love, she finds herself reliving the past in a dark and violent fiction. The film stars Amy Adams, Jake Gyllenhaal, Michael Shannon, Aaron Taylor Johnson, Illa Fisher, Ellie Bamber, and Armie Hammer, and the film is directed by Tom Ford. Not 20 seconds into this movie, you know you're in for something strange. It opens with this art exhibit that focuses on overweight naked women dancing. And considering this is how we're introduced to the main character Susan, it's clear that she has some significant internal struggles, which are revealed throughout the film. Now, it's unclear whether you're supposed to feel sympathetic or not, but ultimately it is revealed. This is a story of contrasts, like the contrast of high art, extravagant society versus raw, rural people. And we learn that Susan left her first husband, Edward, played by Jake Gyllenhaal, because of a belief that he wasn't strong. And yet, over the course of the story, we find out that she's actually the one who is the weak one. And it's not just the contrast in the story, but rather Susan herself tries to contrast herself with her mother and fails to separate herself from what she believes she hated, that high society, low opinion of people who don't meet their specific standards. But Edward saw this in her at a young age, and that's why he could craft her character so poignantly in his novel. Director Tom Ford deserves all the credit for packing this film with so much style and intrigue. The plot itself is essentially a story within a story that also draws on past events. It might sound convoluted, but Tom Ford actually does a really good job of keeping everything coherent. And that story is basically a long and violent metaphor for how their marriage ended between Susan and Edward. And the symbolism is great, even if it's a little on the nose at times. The story is basically a family of three driving across Texas who are run off the road by this group of three young men. And those three young men end up getting into a conflict with the family and ultimately kidnap them. The wife and the daughter are raped and murdered, and then the father is left to basically find out who find the people responsible for killing his family. It is a really dark story, but it actually makes sense when you start to understand the real world context of Susan and Edward's relationship. Essentially, it has to be brutal because of how Susan ended their marriage. Basically, she had an abortion with her husband's child. And suffice it to say, the way that it ends, she gets a pretty easy pass when they basically make plans to meet up for dinner and he doesn't show up. He just leaves her there. That's getting off really easy. But a film such as this relies on the actors, and everybody was up to the task. Amy Adams is perfect as the disconnected, empty artist. And Edward actually points out early in the film that she has sad eyes like her mother, and she definitely does have this sort of emptiness in her expression throughout the film. Gyllenhaal plays Edward as well as Tony, who's the protagonist of his story. And I'd say if not for Nightcrawler, this is one of the best roles for him in recent memory. Likewise, Michael Shannon, who is, a good go-to for that kind of gruff, raw, rural character, and he has this rough intensity about him as the homicide detective. And then Aaron Taylor Johnson is actually sometimes cartoonish as the villain of the story. However, since he's the symbol of both unchecked masculinity as well as Susan's indifference to the world, it really is kind of on the nose. Like seriously, throughout the movie, Tom Ford just smacks you over the head with metaphors. This is a dark film, but ultimately it succumbs to a flaw of tropes, and that's my key gripe with this movie. In the story, when Tony is looking for Ray, played by Aaron Taylor Johnson, he finds him sleeping in the trailer where his family died. So after Ray gets away from Tony and Michael Shannon's character, he basically goes back to this trailer and goes to sleep. It's like way too convenient and way too easy an ending for this story. And there is a point where the fiction becomes almost too simplistic to be impactful. Everything seems to fall into place very conveniently, and ultimately it turns into a very basic revenge story without this grand violent gesture at the end. It is violent, people die, but compared to some movies, it doesn't have that really ultra violent sense to it. But obviously the point of the story is to show Susan how wrong she was. But the proverbial nail in the coffin lacks any kind of nuance. He basically just kills him. Tony just kills Ray. And you can tell that she understands this message, but it doesn't feel as strong as the actual way their story ends. Like the way he leaves her at the restaurant just to basically wonder, that I feel is much more poignant than this, very simplistic, predictable story ending. Overall, there is a lot you can take from this film. It's complicated yet simple, murky yet clear, but the actors are what make it worth your time with fantastic performances all around. It is a revenge story, but a more creative way of getting that revenge. If you can stomach the emotional and sometimes overt brutality throughout this film, you just might see the well-crafted thriller for what it is. I'm giving this film a 9 out of 10 mainly for the way the story is framed as well as the acting, because everybody across the board is remarkable. If you've seen Nocturnal Animals, let me know what you think of the film. And that does it for this episode of Key Gripe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye. Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Nice work. Good job. If you like what you saw, you can just go ahead and click that subscribe button for all videos past and future. You can also head over to my website and see all the other stuff that I do, including the books I've written. So go ahead, click stuff.